Texas Hill Country, spring of 1872. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and blood. Evelyn Zeller's wedding dress was stiff with dust by the time they reached the gates of the Eaton ranch. Her wrists were raw where the rope had bitten into them, though it had been cut an hour ago. She sat stiffly in the buckboard, not looking at the man beside her. Silas Eaton, owner of the largest spread from San Marcos to Mason, adjusted his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. "You will smile when we get inside," he said. "My men don't need to see you sulking." Evelyn didn't answer. She stared ahead at the house, 3 stories of limestone and dark timber, casting a shadow across the dry ground. Her heart beat like a war drum. She was 22, recently orphaned, and sold like cattle to this man because the banker back in San Antonio said her father's debts had to be paid one way or another. Inside the house, the wedding had already taken place. Signed papers, a preacher's quick blessing, and a forced kiss that made her stomach turn. That was 2 days ago. Now she was being brought to her new home. Silas nodded to the ranch hands as they passed. "She's mine now," he said loud enough for them to hear. Evelyn kept her chin up, but inside, she was breaking piece by piece. That night she locked the bedroom door with the iron key she'd stolen from the study. Silas pounded once, then left her alone. She sat on the floor until morning, knees pulled to her chest, the moonlight painting harsh lines across the wood. Her father had been a kind man, but foolish with cards. The debts hadn't killed him, his heart did. Evelyn buried him with her own hands, sold everything she could, then found herself backed into a corner when the bank demanded payment. Silas offered a solution. Marry him, and the debt would vanish. She should have run, but where? The world wasn't kind to women alone. 3 days later, she was standing at the edge of a dry creek bed, carrying a tin pail for water. She bent to scoop the muddy trickle when she heard the sound hooves fast. She lifted her head and went still. Across the creek, a rider appeared. A Comanche warrior on a chestnut horse, his black braid trailing behind him. He was young, maybe 25, his skin sun-burnished, his eyes sharp as flint. He dismounted in one smooth motion. "I am not here to harm," he said calmly in English. Evelyn straightened, heart in her throat. "Then why are you here? I saw you fall from the wagon 2 days ago. Outside San Marcos." His gaze didn't waver. "You looked afraid." She swallowed. "What is your name?" "Lukasi." He stepped no closer. "I waited until now. You were not safe to speak to then." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the pail. "You should go," she whispered, glancing toward the ranch house behind her. "I know who that man is," Lukasi said. "He takes what he wants. He does not keep it safe." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She turned and walked away. But something shifted in her chest. Over the next week, she saw Lukasi again. Always near the creek, always careful. He brought her water from a spring deeper in the hills. He never asked questions, never pushed. Just stayed. One afternoon, she sat with him beneath a cottonwood tree, her hands folded in her lap. "I do not belong to him," she said quietly. Lukasi nodded. "But I am trapped." "No one is trapped forever," he answered. She looked up at him, sunlight catching in his eyes. "Why do you care?" "You remind me of someone I lost," he said. "And I do not like seeing something wild and good locked away." Evelyn's breath caught. "I am not wild." "You are," he said. "But you have forgotten." She didn't know how to answer that. The next day, Silas struck her. It wasn't the first time, but it was the worst. Her lip split on her tooth, and he threw her into the wall hard enough to bruise her shoulder. She curled on the floor until he left, her vision swimming. That night she ran. Barefoot, blood on her cheek, she ran toward the creek. She did not know if Lukasi would be there. She just ran. And he was. He caught her before she fell, his arms strong and steady. "I am here," he said. She sobbed into his shoulder, hands clutching his shirt. "Please!" she whispered. I can't go back. You will not. He took her to the hills, to a hidden place where thick trees covered the mouth of a cave. Inside were blankets and water, and a fire pit from old use. She slept in his arms, the first safe sleep in weeks. The next morning, she woke to birdsong and the smell of meat cooking. Lukasi knelt by the fire, turning a piece of rabbit on a spit. She sat up slowly. Did you watch me all night? I kept the fire low, he said. And yes. She looked at him, really looked. You are not afraid of Silas? I have fought worse than him. I believe you. He handed her the food. Eat. Then we talk about what comes next. What does come next? Lukasi's eyes softened. Freedom. And after that? Whatever you want. She stared at the flames. I do not know what I want. You will, he said. When you are no longer afraid. 2 days passed. Then Silas found them. Evelyn had gone to gather water near a small pool when she heard the sharp crack of a rifle. She dropped the pail and ran. She found Lukasi standing with his knife drawn, blood on his arm. Silas stood 10 feet away, shotgun lifted. You think you can take my wife? Silas growled. Lukasi didn't flinch. She is not yours. Silas cocked the gun. Evelyn stepped between them. Stop! He touched you, did he? Silas snarled. You filthy little. Lukasi moved like lightning. The knife flew not to kill, but to disarm. It struck the shotgun stock, knocking it aside. Before Silas could react, Lukasi was on him. The fight was brutal, short. When it ended, Silas lay sprawled on the ground, bleeding from his nose and lip. Evelyn stepped forward. You will leave us alone. Silas spat blood. You are mine. No, she said. Not anymore. He left. Evelyn stood shaking for a long time. Lukasi touched her hand gently. You are free now. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest. So are you. That night, she kissed him beneath the stars. Not with fear, not with guilt. With quiet certainty. Lukasi cupped her face, his touch careful. You are brave, Evelyn. You make me brave, she whispered. His lips met hers again, and this time, they did not stop. The hills turned green with late spring, and the mornings grew warmer as days passed without pursuit. Lukasi moved with quiet purpose through the rugged country west of Blanco, guiding Evelyn along narrow deer paths and shaded hollows, always keeping the sun at his shoulder and the wind in his ears. They didn't speak much in those first days. Evelyn's voice had gone rough with silence, and Lukasi never asked more than she was ready to give. One evening, they stopped near a cluster of limestone outcroppings where the wind carried the scent of cedar and damp earth. Lukasi led her to a narrow ledge above a streambed, where the air was cool and the trees above bowed low with shade. He knelt and smoothed a space for the fire with his palm. Evelyn stood near the edge, watching the water below catch the dying light. Why here? She asked. He didn't look up. This place remembers peace. You can feel it in the stones. She turned toward him. You know this land better than anyone I've ever met. He added dry twigs to the fire pit. My mother's people traveled through here when the grass was tall. Before the soldiers built their roads and made promises they never kept. Evelyn crouched across from him, resting her arms on her knees. Do you still have people nearby? He paused, then nodded. Some. North of Llano. We are fewer now. Would they take me in? He met her eyes. They would not turn you away. Her voice was barely above a breath. I don't want to be a burden. You are not, he said. You are a woman who survived. She blinked, then looked away. That night, she lay beside him on a bed of woven grass and rolled blankets. When a coyote called in the distance, she reached for his hand beneath the covers. He laced their fingers together without a word. The following morning, they followed the stream north, stepping carefully over slippery rocks and roots. Evelyn's boots had begun to wear thin, the soles splitting near the toe. Lukasi noticed without comment, then veered off trail. He returned with a pair of deerskin moccasins, finely worked and stitched with strong sinew. She took them from his hands. Where did you learn to make these? My grandmother taught me, he said. Before she died. Evelyn ran her fingers over the stitching. She must have been patient. She was. I was not. She smiled, small and quick. They traveled 2 more days before the land leveled into wide flats of grass. The trees grew sparse, wind sweeping low across the fields. Lukasi walked slightly ahead, his eyes following the skyline. Around his neck hung a small bone charm, worn smooth from years of touch. Evelyn reached forward, brushing her fingers against it. What does it mean? It's from my sister's necklace, he said. She died when I was a boy. She stopped walking. I've never asked, have you lost many? He looked at her, the wind tugging at the edge of his coat. Enough to know what is worth holding on to. She stepped close and took his face in both hands. You don't have to carry it alone. His eyes softened. You are not afraid of who I was. I've seen what cruelty looks like. You're nothing like it. They reached the edge of a small settlement by dusk. 4 cabins, a blacksmith's lean-to, and a corral of goats. Lukasi spoke to an older woman in Comanche, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp with recognition. She embraced him without hesitation, then turned her gaze to Evelyn. She says you can stay here. Lukasi translated. But there's work to be done. I expected nothing less, Evelyn said. By the end of the week, Evelyn's hands were calloused from hauling water and grinding corn. She learned to scrape hides and smoke meat, her movements growing sure each day. The women taught her how to braid sweetgrass and how to wrap her shawl so the wind wouldn't steal it. No one questioned her presence. One afternoon, while she peeled roots by the cooking fire, a young girl sat beside her, watching in silence. Evelyn glanced over and offered a piece of parched corn. Your name? The child asked softly. Evelyn. The girl chewed slowly. Lukasi brought you? Yes. He never brings anyone. Evelyn looked toward the trees, where Lukasi split wood with a practiced rhythm. Maybe he was waiting for someone who needed to be brought. That night, Lukasi joined her near the river's edge. Fireflies blinked between the reeds, and frogs called from the dark. I have something for you, he said. She turned from the water. He held a small pouch, stitched from soft hide. Inside was a single shell, polished and strung on a leather cord. She touched it gently. Is it for protection? No, he said. It's so you remember you belong somewhere now. Her throat tightened. Do I? He stepped closer. You belong with me. She didn't speak. She reached up, tied the cord around her neck, and leaned into him. He kissed her slowly, not with urgency, but with the certainty of something long earned. The wind whispered through the grass, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn did not flinch from what might come next. The heat settled into the earth as summer took hold, drawing moisture from the soil and turning the wind dry and sharp. By then, Evelyn had grown steady in the rhythm of the village. Her fingers no longer fumbled with the beating needle, and her voice knew the shape of the language, though she still spoke it softly, careful not to misplace meaning. One evening, she sat on a low stool outside the cooking shelter, her back warm from the fire behind her. Lukasi approached from the far edge of the clearing, dust on his shoulders, a bough slung across his back. She watched him with a quiet certainty that had grown between them like a root system deep, unseen, and strong. He crouched beside her and offered a bundle wrapped in bark fiber. Inside lay 3 quail, feathers clean and necks snapped quick. She took them without speaking, brushing her hand against his as she did. You went far today, she said, setting the birds aside. There's a canyon west of here, he replied, pulling off his moccasins. Game's better there. Fewer settlers pass through. She glanced at the horizon, where the sun hovered low. Did you see any? 2 men on horseback, East Ridge. Didn't come down. Her hand stilled over the quail. Were they looking? They were riding hard. Didn't stop to turn. She nodded once and resumed plucking feathers, the small, rhythmic motion anchoring her. Later that night, they sat by themselves near the edge of a dry ravine. The sky stretched wide, and the stars blinked into place, slow and solemn. Lukasi lay back against the slope, arms folded behind his head. You don't talk about what you dream. She stirred the dust with the toe of her boot. Dreams are slippery. They never stay long enough to explain. What does stay? I remember a house with a green roof. My mother singing before the fever took her. And my father's shoes by the door. He never put them away. Lukasi didn't speak. His silence was never empty, it made room for her words to land. I used to think if I worked hard enough, I could earn quiet, she said. But it never came. Not until now. He sat up, knees bent, hands loose between them. You don't owe quiet to anyone. You take it when it finds you. She looked at him, the firelight catching the line of his jaw. Have you taken anything for yourself? He hesitated, then reached out and threaded his fingers through hers. Only you. The next morning, they were summoned to the elder's lodge. The air inside was cool and shaded, the roof low with woven reeds. The older woman who'd first welcomed Evelyn sat at the center, braiding dried grass into a coil. A younger man stood near the doorway, arms folded, his expression unreadable. The elder's voice was low but firm. There is word from the south. The rancher who once claimed the woman has sent men north. He offers payment for her return. Evelyn's stomach turned, but she lifted her chin. I won't go back. The man by the door spoke. He won't stop unless he believes you're already gone. Lukasi's jaw tightened. Then we give him reason to believe it. The elder nodded. There is a place near the river bend. A trader passes through each new moon, heading west. You leave before he arrives. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the dust into small spirals. Evelyn stood with Lukasi beneath the arms of a cottonwood, its leaves whispering above them. I don't want to disappear, she said. I want to live. He reached for the shell still hanging at her throat. Then we go where life is still ours to shape. They left before dawn, with packs over their shoulders and food tied in oilcloth. No one bid them farewell with words. The villagers believed in quiet partings, in letting absence speak for itself. They followed the river north, where the land opened into bluffs and the soil turned red beneath their feet. At night, they made camp in the shelter of rock formations. Evelyn learned to read the sky like a map, while Lukasi taught her to trace elk tracks by the bend of crushed grass. On the sixth day, they reached a narrow valley scattered with juniper and low sage. A wagon waited near a shallow ford, the trader already hitching his mule. He eyed them without surprise. You look like two people needing a road. Lukasi nodded. West as far as you go. The man spit to the side. I go past Fort Stockton. After that, it's open country. That's better than behind us, Evelyn said. They rode in the back, pressed between sacks of flour and crates of tools. The road was rough, but Evelyn didn't mind the bruises. Each mile was a step farther from what she'd left, and closer to what she was building. That night, camped beneath a bluff lit golden by firelight, she turned toward Lukasi, her face shadowed by the brim of his hat, which she'd taken to wearing. Do you ever think about where we'll stop? When the ground feels right. And if we never find it? He took her hand, resting it over his chest. Then we make it ourselves. She leaned into him, and he kissed her forehead with the care of someone who'd never been careless. For the first time in her life, she believed in what came next. Not because it would be easy, but because she would not face it alone. The trader dropped them at a fork in the road 2 days west of Fort Stockton, where the land flattened into open basin, rimmed by low mesas. The wagon creaked away with a nod, and then it was only the two of them, the weight of the sun behind them and nothing but dusky stillness ahead. They walked until the light softened and the wind cooled their skin. That evening, they found a stand of cottonwoods along a dry arroyo, and Lukasi knelt to press his palm into the cracked mud. He tilted his head, listening. "There's a spring not far," he said. "It runs under the rock. We'll dig shallow." By dusk, a small pool had gathered in the hollow he'd cleared, and Evelyn dipped her hands into the cool water, then brushed the back of her neck. Her skin had burned along the path, and small blisters had begun to rise at her collar. She didn't complain, but Lukasi noticed. He tore a strip from the inside of his pack, soaked it, and handed it to her. "You could have warned me," she said, pressing the damp cloth to her neck. "I thought you'd wear the hat. You never said it was yours to lend." He looked at her then, the corner of his mouth twitching as if caught between reply and restraint. "I wouldn't take what's not freely given," she added. "You didn't take it. I left it." She folded the cloth and tied it behind her neck. "You always do things quiet. There's more truth in quiet than in noise." She sat beside him, the fresh water pooling between their boots. "And what truth are you carrying now?" He picked up a stone and turned it in his palm. "That I've never known a woman who saw me without asking me to be something different." She traced a line in the dirt with the toe of her boot. "And I've never known a man who looked at me without ownership in his eyes." A long pause passed between them, not heavy, but full. The next morning, they climbed into the low hills to the north, where the ground grew rocky and the brush thinner. They came across an abandoned line shack, its roof half collapsed and the door hanging loose on rusted hinges. Inside, mice had made nests in the hay, but the back wall still stood solid, and a small stove leaned in the corner, ash still in its belly. Lukasi stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "We can rebuild it." Evelyn stepped inside, testing the boards with her heel. "It'd hold a bed. And a table." They worked through the day, stripping the warped shingles and laying new ones from scavenged planks. Lukasi shaped them with care, using a hatchet and the edge of a flat rock for smoothing. Evelyn cleared out the inside, burned what couldn't be saved, and swept the rest clean with a bundle of dried grass. That evening she stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, hands on her hips. "It's not much," she said. "It's ours." She turned to him. "Do you want to stay here?" He looked out across the basin, the wind lifting the edge of his shirt. "There's space here to be forgotten. And to begin." They slept inside that night, the fire low in the stove and the stars framed by the broken slats overhead. Evelyn lay on her side, one arm tucked beneath her head, watching the faint glow of embers. "Will you tell me about your sister?" she asked. Lukasi's voice was quiet. "She was born during a hard winter. My mother said she came out angry at the cold. She used to braid thorns into her hair to scare off boys. What happened to her?" "White sickness," he said. "The kind that fills the lungs. We had no medicine strong enough." Evelyn reached for his hand. "Mine faded from fever too." He laced their fingers together beneath the blanket. "Then they're together somewhere." The wind shifted outside, stirring dust through the cracks. By the end of the week, the shack had walls again. They patched the roof and hung a curtain of burlap at the door. Lukasi snared rabbits near the edge of the scrub and cooked them with mesquite pods she'd gathered. Evelyn found wild onions and a patch of prickly pear, which she peeled and stewed into a sour mash. She planted seeds from a pouch the trader had given her, beans, squash, and a few kernels of corn. Lukasi cleared the ground with a sharpened stick, and they worked in silence, the kind that felt like music. One night, as the moon rose full over the ridge, Evelyn stood barefoot in the doorway, her shift brushing her knees. Lukasi came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you ever miss the place you left?" he asked. She leaned back into him. "I miss the girl I might have been, if it had been safe to be soft." "You're not soft now?" She turned to face him. "I'm something else. Something I never had the chance to become before." He kissed her then, slow and steady, his hands warm on her back. She pressed against him, not with urgency, but with the weight of every choice that had led her here. They made love with the door open, the night wind cool on their skin, and the stars watching without judgment. In the morning, she woke with her head on his chest and his hand curled around hers. "I never asked what you want," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. She looked at him. "I want to wake up beside you until my hair turns silver." He smiled, slow and quiet. "Then we stay." And they did. Rain came in the middle of the night, a slow, soaking kind that tapped gentle against the roof and filled the cracks in the dry arroyo. Evelyn woke to the sound of it, and turned her face into Lukasi's shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar smoke and warm skin. He was still asleep, one arm draped over her waist, his breath deep and even. She stayed like that, watching the light shift against the wall as dawn crept in. The roof held, every shingle they'd laid still tight. When she slipped from the bed and stepped outside, the world looked washed new. The dust settled, the air clean and heavy with the smell of wet earth. She crouched near the row of young beans and ran her fingers through the damp soil. The seedlings had taken root, small leaves unfurled and reaching. She touched one gently, then stood and walked to the shed where they kept the tools. Inside, the handle of the hoe was drying from where Lukasi had repaired it the day before with a strip of rawhide and a square nail flattened smooth. Behind her, the door creaked. "You're up early," Lukasi said, his voice rough with sleep. "I wanted to see if the rows held." He picked up a length of rope and coiled it as he stepped inside. "They did. You tied them tight. I didn't trust the wind not to change its mind." He leaned against the frame. "You still don't trust what you've built?" "I trust it," she said. "But I watch it too." He nodded once. "Then you'll keep it safe." They spent the morning clearing the channel behind the house, where runoff had gathered in a shallow pool. Evelyn rolled her sleeves and waded in to clear the stones that blocked the flow. Lukasi carried buckets to the garden and poured slow streams around the squash hills, careful not to drown the roots. It was the kind of work that left a person tired in the right way, used up but content. They ate late in the day, sitting beneath a cottonwood with cold biscuits and prickly pear syrup spread thick between them. Lukasi pulled a small cloth bundle from his pocket and set it in her lap. "I found these near the ridge," he said. "Thought they'd suit you better than the ones you've worn down." Inside were a pair of earrings, small discs of hammered copper, simple and shaped by hand. She turned one over between her fingers, then looked at him. "You made these?" He gave a short nod. "Used to do that when I traveled alone. Something to trade." She ran her thumb along the edge. "You think I need to trade something now?" "No," he said. "I think you ought to have something that marks where you've come to." She fastened them in her ears without a word. That evening, thunder rolled low in the distance, but the sky stayed pale. Evelyn mixed flour and lard into a stiff dough and baked it over coals, while Lukasi shaped a length of mesquite into a new handle for the spade. They moved around each other without needing to speak much, their habits folding into one another like pages in a worn book. After supper, Evelyn leaned against the doorframe and watched the sun drop below the bluff. Her feet were bare, and the hem of her dress caught the breeze. "You ever think about what's beyond this place?" she asked. Lukasi stood behind her, his arms crossed loosely. "Not anymore." "Why not?" "Because every time I stop moving, I used to think I'd have to start again. But now I don't feel the edge of anything under my feet." She turned to him. "What do you feel?" "Ground that holds." They slept with the windows open that night, the air sweet with the smell of damp sage. Evelyn curled against Lukasi's chest, listening to the slow beat of his heart. She pressed her hand over it, palm flat. "You ever think we might have met somewhere else?" she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "Maybe. But not like this." She closed her eyes. "No. Not like this." The seasons turned. The rains came and went, and the garden grew thick with vines and blossoms. Evelyn learned to tan hides and stitch them into pouches and moccasins. Lukasi built a smokehouse from upright logs and clay-packed walls. They traded with passers-by, travelers, trappers, a widow with 2 boys who brought dried apples in exchange for salt pork. By autumn, the house had a second room, and the roof had been sealed with pine pitch. Above the hearth hung a carved branch, split and bent into a circle, their mark, not for others to see, but to remind themselves that nothing begun in love would ever be lost. One crisp morning, Evelyn stood at the edge of the field, her hand resting on the small curve beneath her apron. Lukasi came up beside her, brushing the hair from her temple. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded. 3 months or close to it. He rested his palm over hers. "Then we'll make room." "There's already room," she said. "More than I ever thought I'd carry." He didn't speak, but he kissed her then, slow and sure, and the wind moved around them like a blessing. Time passed, as it always does. The baby came in the spring, a girl with her father's eyes and her mother's quiet strength. They named her Wisa, born of the dawn. They grew older in the house they built by hand. The fields widened. The roof held through every storm. And each night, Evelyn lay beside Lukasi with the same steady knowing in her chest, that she was no longer waiting, or surviving, or hoping to be seen. She was home. Forever.